There are a lot of uniques in Diablo 4, especially when talking about the Barbarian. It should feel really good to see that animation that a legendary or ancestral unique has dropped for you in the game. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Today we're going to be going over the best ones you want to keep an eye out for. You don't want to sell these. And then kind of most of them, which are pretty bad, but there's going to be some interesting uses to some of them. So definitely stick around for that. So let's dive straight into it. What up, Barbarians? It is MurderInc here, talking about all of the uniques. Is that what we're supposed to call them? Let me see. Yeah, ancestral uniques. I guess we can just call them uniques in the game for Barbarian specifically. The good ones, the bad ones, and I put them all in my inventory here. We're just going to go through the list here, starting off with Rage of Harrogath. So this is considered very good because a lot of kind of beginner guides and not so fleshed out guides. I mean, the max roll guide for the most part is pretty good, but there's a few major flaws to that. Icy Veins, from what I've heard, is terrible, so if you're using that, time to find a better build guide for sure here. So I want to explain a few things about this chest piece. So the first thing is, the main purpose of using this is the effect, as the purpose of pretty much every unique should be. Lucky hit up to a 40% chance of reducing the cooldowns of your non-ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds when you inflict bleeding on an elite. Okay, so applies to elites only, and it's a lucky hit. So let's explain lucky hit very quickly for those of you who aren't familiar with it. If you hover over any of your tooltips here, you will see lucky hit chance on the tooltip if it's applying direct damage, or any kind of damage. I won't say direct. So we can see for Whirlwind, it's a 20% chance per hit. You're hitting quite a few things, but 20% chance is rather low here. Then we have Ground Stomp. It's 33% chance, but there's a cooldown. You can't spam it like your core skill, so there's that trade-off there. And then I have Four Shouts. Now, if we go to our abilities, we can see that different abilities have different lucky hit chances. 25 on Steel Grasp. Rupture has a 50% lucky hit chance, which is very strong. And I know Hammer of the Ancients also has a 50% chance as well. And if you wanted to scroll through all the abilities, 25 here, 30 here, you can definitely do that as long as it's applying some type of damage. 40% for kick, you kind of get the drift here. So not only does lucky hit chance have to proc, this is a separate proc by the way, the lucky hit has to hit that 20% threshold. On top of that, you also have to hit, where's the chest piece right here, the 40% chance after that. So you have to hit 2 percentages to get this to proc. So with that being said, you also have to be hitting an elite for all of the stars to align here. So about this unique, it's much better early on than it is later on, right? Later on, you're doing a lot of speed farming. There can be a case where you can say, isn't this good for pushing since you're going to be struggling with elites the most? The answer is no. Why is the answer no? So let's take a look at the stats on this piece of gear and why you're probably not going to want to use this over a normal chest piece. Physical damage, crit strike chance with physical damage against elites, not that good. Damage reduction, very good that are bleeding. So obviously this is going to be perfect for a bleeding build because now we have two things that directly correlate with bleeds. Let's look at a normal chest piece. We have 3 damage reduction, total armor. You can also get plus rank to challenging shout, which is another huge damage reduction. And then we can put any imprint of our choice. The one that I most commonly use is gain up to 20% additional damage reduction from bleeding targets. So now you have to consider, what am I losing survivability wise compared to using this chest piece? So I'm not going to say this is a bad chest piece by any means. In the early game, I think it's very strong. However, based on how low lucky hit chance really is for a lot of the meta builds for Barbarian, it's hard to justify long-term use of Rage of Harrogath. Now this used to be very strong in like bleed heavy builds with Rend and Rupture. It probably still is, except for those abilities were kind of nerfed to the ground because they were, I don't want to say bugged, but they were interacting with certain aspects in a, I guess, bugged manner, and they were just one-shotting everything. Like endgame bosses, world bosses, just billion bleeds. We're talking billion, 100 million bleeds just flying everywhere. So that's what happened with that. So overall, This is really good early, and then it starts to fall off heavily later on. The next unique we're going to talk about is going to be Razorplate. This one's pretty straightforward. You may be thinking, okay, this is obviously terrible. It has no stats on it, straight armor, and then gain thorns. The thing is, you can make a Thorns build in this game. If you're going to make a Thorns build, to gimp yourself of 10,650, just depending on my roll here, Thorns, you would never do it. Because the amount of Thorns you can get, I think I have Thorns somewhere here. Maybe not. Okay, so we can just look at the Rage of Harrogath here. Plus 743 Thorns. That's like, I guess, a normal roll. And this is a max roll on a 790 chess piece. You cannot compare that to 10,650, which will probably go up when I upgrade this. So if you're running a Thorns build, this is a very good piece and probably core piece for any type of Thorns build. So you do have that there. I'm not well versed because I haven't done any testing with Thorns. It's on my to-do list for sure. There's quite a few pretty cool builds you can play with, but it just seems like there's no way you could drop this unless you really need the damage reduction from this. But Thorns builds are usually all about tankiness, and you can pretty much avoid all of the substat damage rolls here to your advantage. The next item we have is going to be our first weapon, which is the Hellhammer. Now, weapons are tricky in this game, and they're even trickier for Barbarians because we have 4 of them, and these substats matter a ton. It's what the class was scaled around, which is why we've been nerfed so many times. Crit damage, vulnerable damage, close, core, and then all stats are strength. Very strong stats. So the effect of a unique weapon is going to have to be crazy because most of them don't have all 4 or even 2 of the 4 best rolls on them. So with that, just looking at the Hellhammer on the bottom here, upheaval ignites the ground, burning enemies for an additional 1,766 damage over 3 seconds. Now it's not literally 1,766. My whirlwinds are critting for about 1.6 million, and the tooltip here says 9,000 to 11,000, so this technically can hit pretty hard, but you're not hitting in the millions, and upheaval as it is a very resource intense skill to use, so you can't really spam it. So I don't know, you do get damage reduction from burning. Everything else is going to be additive damage from what I can see here. Damage to CC, damage with the bludgeoning, which this is a bludgeoning of course, and then damage to burning. So 3 very mediocre stats along with damage reduction, which is very good. You cannot get damage reduction from enemies that are burning on any other piece unless you, I guess, get a chess piece from a separate class that has an affix like that. But so once again, early game, this is going to be fine. Once you start kind of ramping up, you're going to want a real bludgeon weapon that kind of has stats similar to this. The next thing is going to be Ancient Oath. Now, the same kind of thing, you look at the bottom here, Steel Grasp, which I did highlight in the best Hammer the Ancients build that I found that isn't for pushing. It's just so much fun. We use Steel Grasp. So this could potentially be viable because this would be replacing a stat stick. The question is, what does the effect do? Steel Grasp launches 2 additional chains. So wider chains can, I guess, pull more mobs in, but if you've ever looked at the normal Steel Grasp, you don't really need that. Enemies hit by Steel Grasp are slowed by 55% for 3 seconds. This can be very strong because this then allows you to go back to your talent tree and you can remove Hamstring. So you get a free talent point by taking this, and you can scale up No Mercy because Steel Grasp is going to be slowing enemies, giving you a boosted crit rate chance here. Now, as far as what the point of getting extra Steel Grasp ranks are going to be, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, I'll hover one more time. +6 ranks to Steel Grasp. It is the max roll here. So what it's basically going to do is it's going to lower the cooldown. That's what putting points in, just to kind of proof of concept here. We see the cooldown 8.7, 8.7, 7.67, 7.27. I mean, the cooldown drops like not enough for this to be worth it, but I guess it is what it is. So the damage goes up. Again, you're not going to be like one-shotting people with Steel Grasp. That would kind of be cool, I'm not gonna lie. But the lower cooldown isn't really relevant, for one, because you get 2 charges of it. So there's that, and you're lowering the cooldown so much where you'll probably never use 2 charges and say, I don't know what to do, I have no more charges left. If you really needed that, you can grab the additional charge here, but the Berserk is pretty nice as well, so I don't know, maybe there is some benefit and I can't see it, but honestly it does not look that worth it to me. So there's Ancient Oath. The one good thing is you do get vulnerable damage from this. That is one of our best in slot stats here, and I think, I don't have any good rolls here, but if you did roll 47%, you would be pretty good. Where is this useful for? If you have no points into Steel Grasp, if you get plus rank to any skill, it unlocks that skill for you. So essentially you could get this, equip this, wouldn't be the worst thing because you can now add a new skill onto your bar without actually speccing into it. Going to have a relatively short cooldown. You'll be able to pull all the mobs to you, which has an awesome animation for sure. And hey, so I would say this is definitely good for early game and mid game if you can get your hands on this. But going to end game, a slashing weapon with crit damage, strength, core skill, and vulnerable again is going to outweigh it heavily. Next, moving on to Overkill. Deathblow creates a shockwave. So if you ever played Hammer the Ancients, there's a very popular aspect that's similar to this for Hammer the Ancients. Now Deathblow hits like a truck, like an absolute truck. We can just go to the abilities one more time here. We can just start comparing tooltips. Now the multipliers aren't going to be the same as Hammer the Ancients, but I'm just going to show you the base damage here. So we have 19,000. We're just going to look at the low end. I know we should probably look at the average, but let's look at the low end here. 19,000 on a 50% scaling ability, and we do have lots of multipliers, so I do understand that, but we're not going to consider that for now. Compared to Deathblow, which is 13,000 with 120% scaling. So this is obviously very, very strong. So again, 13 with 120% compared to 19 with 50%. So if you want to see some incredibly big numbers, you can definitely use this. However, this is when the scaling comes in. So you get 100% multiplicative increased damage to bosses only, which is like, okay. You have Fury regeneration if you damage one target. Okay. Berserking is okay. The reason why it probably won't out damage Hammer the Ancients is because Enhanced Hammer is crazy strong. 3% multiplicative for 5 seconds for each enemy damage, up to 10, so that's 30%. And then 1% for each additional point of Fury, so you can kind of easily make the comparison there. If you have 100 Fury, you're getting 100% multiplicative damage, which is pretty much the same as what you're going to get to bosses only from Deathblow. So if you want to be hitting 60 to 100 million death blows, I haven't tested it, so I can't really say it's not possible, but I just personally don't see it. But the fact that you are now creating a shockwave, it's going to be much easier, because if you look at the second part of the tooltip, enemies who die to this effect also reset Deathblow's cooldown. So there's pretty cool synergy here for sure. So this is another build that's on my to-do list to try, because I think there are few legendaries that could actually work, and this is probably going to be one of them, because like I said, the fact that it resets the cooldown and it's now an AoE potentially makes it viable for farming. Definitely in the lower tiers for sure. And as far as the substats, we have physical over power damage, damage to injured, and crit chance against injured, which you can't value high because the purpose is going to be to one-shot them to then reset the cooldown. The next unique is going to be Fields of Crimson. Now, it's hard to judge this, so I'm not going to skip over it, but I'm just going to briefly talk about it. Rupture and Ren builds were completely busted. Now they've been heavily nerfed, and I don't really think anyone's been testing just how good they are. Based on the nerf size, it was pretty much big enough for a lot of players to be like, yikes, like they just pretty much made this unviable. But I cannot confirm that. I haven't seen anyone touch it since the nerf, so it is what it is. If you have touched it, leave a comment below, let me know what your results are. But I know you can stack like up to plus 21 ranks of Rupture still. Yeah, this obviously goes to plus. We have plus 6 here on this roll, so 6 plus 5 is 11. Plus, I think you can get 4 on the gloves, 3 on the helmet. So there's a lot of ranks to Rupture you can, in fact, get. And we also have a Rupture cooldown on this. But again, we're going to be losing out on crit damage, vulnerability damage. I guess crit damage doesn't matter too much for bleeds, but vulnerability damage, strength definitely matters a lot here. So as far as the effect, we have Rupture creates a blood pool. Enemies standing in the pool take 10% increased multiplicative damage. That's good. That is good. The actual pool numbers, irrelevant, but the multiplicative damage, of course, is very strong. So that's just a brief rundown of Fields of Crimson. The next, we have the Butchers Cleaver, which was a recent drop for me. This is the first time I saw it after farming tons of gear, so it was interesting. And this one, realistically, isn't half bad. The worst part about this one is the fact that it's an axe. Because if you look at a legendary sword, we have crit damage on this second line here, 26.2% critical strike damage as the implicit modifier. Then we go to an axe and it says damage to healthy enemies, which is clearly much worse than crit damage. The one benefit to this is we have an actual roll of critical strike damage in the substats here, but it's another lucky hit chance piece of gear. The thing with this lucky hit chance is if you proc the lucky hit, it's a 100% chance to fear and slow them, again allowing you to get rid of the hamstring ability that we talked about in a previous skill, because when it procs, it's going to slow, which is going to then give you increased crit strike chance. And from there, I mean, if an enemy's feared, it's not dealing damage to you, and it's a 4-second fear, and the slow 75%. This really doesn't matter how you roll, which is nice. You definitely want a high crit damage roll though. So the damage to CC, physical damage, crit chance against injured. The top two are pretty bad, but the crit chance can have some uses for sure here. So I think this is more of a mid-tier to upper tier ancestral unique. The only reason I kind of move it up to upper tier is because overall uniques are pretty bad. So the upper tier of something in a category that's already pretty bad as it is doesn't mean much, but this is definitely a solid jump up from the rest of them. The next thing we have is Ramaldni's Magnum Opus, Ancestral Sword, one-handed of course, so we get the crit damage, which is nice here. Let me go to, I think this is the better one. So we have damage while dual wielding, not good. Damage to close enemies, reasonable. Physical damage, not good. Lucky hit, chance to restore primary resource, but it's up to a 5% chance. So you have your baseline lucky hit chance, and then you have to hit the 5% chance modifier. What does it do? Skills using this weapon deal 0.3% multiplicative increased damage per point of fury you have. So it's like a pseudo version of that secondary that I showed you for Hammer the Ancients, which makes Hammer the Ancients hit for 60 million, 70 million, 80 million. So it's definitely a very strong multiplier to have on that weapon. The issue is you lose 2 fury every second. So if you played Barb for more than 5 minutes, you know the biggest problem with Barbarian is the fury management and generation. So adding something like this that further hinders your fury probably isn't the angle. It really isn't. So I'm not saying this is not going to be viable. I think there are a few builds being theory crafted as we speak, Whirlwind specifically, that can possibly have use for this, but I'm skeptical. I think it's going to be hard to pull off, but the multiplier is very strong, so this remains to be seen for sure. So as of right now, I would say it's a mid-tier, potentially very, very strong. So if you get one, it rolls to 0.3 multiplicative from the bottom. Probably keep it just in case you start seeing any builds pop up with this ancestral unique. Now we're going to be talking about Gohr's Devastating Grips. I lied, we're not going to be talking about Gohr's Devastating Grips. We're going to be talking about Doombringer, something that if I've seen it, I've sold it. I'm not sure I've seen it though. It would make sense that I sold it because if you look at this, maximum health, core skill damage, which is fine, 5% lucky hit chance, again, terrible to heal, and then the lucky hit chance in the bottom, 10% chance, really low chance, to deal shadow damage to surrounding enemies and reduce their damage done by 20% for 5 seconds. Now again, if you're using high lucky damage abilities, then maybe you have something with this, but unless you're drinking like a lucky hit potion and you're stacking it on, I think gloves is one of the free rolls we have for lucky hit chance, I really don't see how this can be very good. You'd have to be hitting multiple times, proccing this often, because again, it's only a 10% chance to have this happen. The damage done reduction, I don't know why it just doesn't say damage reduction, but 20% is really strong, and for 5 seconds that's definitely a significant amount of time, but it's going to be really hard to justify this for sure. The next one that's also on this website that I do not have, which is going to be very obvious, is the Grandfather. This is not Barbarian specific, but this is our ultimate bis. I think one person in the world has it, if that, so it's crazy low drop chance. Not even worth talking about it. If you get it, hit me up, send me some footage of you with this in action, and I'd love to do a video on it, but the odds of finding anyone with this, as we can already tell, is little to none. So moving on back in game here, we have Gohr's Devastating Grips. This was heavily nerfed because it needed to be, because you could explode for 1 billion damage. Yes, I said 1 billion. Nothing in the game's hitting for 1 billion besides bleeds, and this was hitting for 1 billion. So attack speed, lucky hit chance, non-physical damage, and Whirlwind rank. So these are really strong. All of our uniques, these are definitely going to be among the best uniques you can possibly get here. Some people don't like them because they don't have crit chance on them. One thing you will realize as you get towards the end game, and this is a Whirlwind specific legendary, obviously, since it gives you rank to Whirlwind. But one thing you will notice is your crit chance is very high on Whirlwind because of Dire Whirlwind. We have so much crit chance, I'm actually using on a one-handed weapon, because if I put on a two-hand, I actually overcap my crit chance. You might be thinking, how? I'm not using Gohrs for one, because I want a specific aspect for the build I'm testing. If you're curious about that, I'm using two one-handed weapons. It's going to be a video soon. So we have 39.6% here, then add 24 on top of that, which is 63%. Then we hover over here and we go to 66%, which is more than enough crit rate for a Whirlwind build that is going to be hitting extremely often. Now, the higher your crit rate is, so if you swap this over to the two-handed weapon and double the effect, going up to 48%, this is where Gohrs can be incredibly strong. The more crits, the more damage you do. And if you don't know how this works, once you start spinning with Whirlwind, it takes the next 100 hits of damage from Whirlwind and then takes 23 or 16 to 26% of the total damage and bursts it in an AoE around you as fire damage. So this can crit depending on if you hit the 100 hits, you can get up to a 20 million hit, which is like really impressive. It's likely you're never going to hit 100 hits unless there's a stupid amount of mobs around you. So on average, you'll probably be able to see from 2 to like 6 million damage, or if you're using the stomp, ground stomp here with the aspect I have on my gloves currently, which gives you multiplicative damage, while inside the earthquake of the stomp I have seen 12, 13, 14 million damage from Gohrs back when I was using, I believe, the 20%, yeah, this 20%. So since then, as we can see, I have a few pairs, and I know I've disassembled some, but I've been playing for a while, I've been farming for a long time, so if you just farm, you will get everything eventually, besides Grandfather and the Shaco helmet for sure. So again, Gohrs is definitely one of the top choices, despite attack speed not scaling with Whirlwind, and there's no crit strike on it. Gonna come down to personal preference. If you can get your crit high enough, you will notice very big numbers from Gohrs, as long as you release it when the enemy bars turn blue, which means they're vulnerable. That's where you're going to get the most of your damage, and I think people aren't doing that, which is why they see underwhelming results from these gloves. The next gloves we're not going to talk about because these are universal gloves. Same with Fist of Fate. This could be good. I mean, 4 lucky hit chance, we're just going to ignore that. Your attacks randomly deal 1% to 300% of their normal damage, so it's a gamble. If you want to gamble, this you can use this in any build you want, especially for Whirlwind, it's snapshots. So if you snapshot a 300% normal damage multiplier, you'll be hitting pretty hard. However, if you snapshot a 1%, you're going to be healing the mob. So it's up to you. This is like a for fun item. I don't think I would ever run it unless I'm, like I said, just having fun, but it is what it is. The next thing is Temerity. This is another hot topic similar to the Rage of Harrogath. Temerity is good at very low levels. I think I have an 80% rule somewhere. Yeah, so here's the 80% rule. This is really good at low levels. As soon as you get to higher levels, you should never be running Temerity, which is another indication that the universal guides that recommend Temerity on them are not very good. It's kind of a bait. So let's talk about why are they not that good. You can kind of see all stat, potion drop rate, lucky hit chance, whatever, and then healing received. You get those substats. What are you giving up on? Giving up on 3 to 4 sets of damage reduction in total armor. So in case you're curious, the survivability difference between both of these are night and day. I guess I can just hit shift to compare them. But if you're curious about barriers and you have these, use them, proc the heal, which you're probably going to be doing with the raid captain right here, or raid leader, sorry, raid leader. Overkill yourself, you're going to proc the Temerity. Watch how quickly, even for someone like myself with 10,881 health, which is rather low health, I've been stacking armor. So 80% of that as a shield. I will lose this in any relevant content in about 2 to 3 seconds, which should be a huge indicator for a lot of people who have been using Temerity. I don't know why I'm hovering the axe, that's my fault. You are not losing 80% of your health in 2 to 3 seconds. So why is the barrier different? Because the barrier is not getting any effects from your mitigation at all. It's not getting fortified, it's not getting your damage reduction, so that's a huge factor in why Temerity is nowhere near as good for use in survivability compared to any normal pair of pants you can get. So early on in the game, if you get this, like, I don't even know the lowest level you can get this, but if it's bound to ancestral, I'm not, like, can you get a sacred version? I probably wouldn't have kept if I can, but if you can get this under 60, it's great. Even up to like 70, I would say it's good. 75. Once you start moving past 75, these gotta go. Even for speed farming, you want the damage reduction to push the highest levels possible you can speed farm. And if you want a shield, what you're going to do is you're going to get a necklace that says +3 ranks of all defensive skills with cooldown reduction and movement speed. That's all you really need. And then if you want an actual good shield, you're going to take Iron Skin. It gives you a barrier if you're missing life. It's a cooldown where you can hit it on use. You don't have to wait for a shout. And what makes Iron Skin so good is an aspect that I don't currently have that gives you an additional 20% damage reduction when you use Iron Skin. So it's not going to be one of those shields like Temerity that's just going to get deleted in 2 to 3 seconds. Now you're getting a 20% DR when you use the ability. So it's there for the shield, which is why it's so strong. So that's kind of my take on that. The next we have Penitent Greaves. This was nerfed to my understanding. You used to be able to permanently spin for the Whirlwind build with these by pairing this with, Ring of the Umbral. Restores 3 Fury when you CC an enemy. The problem is it only happens once per mob now instead of constantly ticking, to my understanding. I've tested it out. That's why these are upgraded to 5.5, and I ran content with it and they're terrible. Like, yes, you get 10% multiplicative damage, but for what these are supposed to do in unison with the Ring of the Umbral, it does not work that way anymore at all. So with that being said, as far as how good are these, early on, they're fantastic. You get free movement speed, you get a free damage multiplier, which you'll never see. So until you can get Fury cost reduction on your boots, which is the Ancestral tier, I know these can drop at a lower level because I'm pretty sure I'm using them on quite a few alts of mine, or were using them prior to World Tier 4. Definitely use them. And even, Fury cost reduction is pretty damn good, so I wouldn't keep these on for too long, but they're definitely viable and they're more of a mid-tier unique for sure. Now all of these are the same here. Next we have 1,000 steps. After gaining the final damage from the Walking Arsenal key passive bonus, you can automatically cast Ground Stomp and gain up to 50 Fury. This cannot happen more than every 30 seconds. The fact that it can happen more than once every 30 seconds is kind of the bad part here, so these are another pair of boots here. As far as unique goes, you would never use this over any just rare piece with an aspect on it. Next we have Mother's Embrace. I don't know if this is a guaranteed drop from the first Lilith in the campaign, but from what I've seen, I think everyone gets this from there. You're going to use it until you get a better ring, so it's not a bad legendary. It definitely has its use for sure. Since you're struggling with resource cost, the fact that you do get it refunded when you're hitting 5 or more, which is quite often, is pretty big. But compared to the power of a normal ring, this does not come close. Normal rings have resource, vulnerable damage, crit strike, and crit damage. You just can't compete with that. So while this is okay and can definitely hold you over after the campaign, it does not compare to any reasonable World Tier 4 ring. And finally, we have Battle Trance. This is a frenzy neck piece. I really can't speak too much on this. The only issue with this being a neck piece is the neck piece is arguably the most important piece of gear on Barbarian, period. Pretty much every class. Maybe not every class, but most classes. +3 of all defensive skills is an incredible roll, and the fact that you cannot get that on this necklace lowers the value significantly. So between that, you cannot get cooldown reduction, which is, think about your shouts, right? You need that. Now, if there's a way to use Frenzy to kind of mitigate your CDR, being cooldown reduction issues for your shouts, then you can kind of check off that, but losing +3 ranks to all defensive skills, that's hard to make up even with damage reduction while injured. That's kind of like the worst form of damage reduction. Damage reduction from close is very strong. Basic skill damage is useless, and +3 ranks to Frenzy. I've never tested Frenzy. I do have this max roll here that I've kind of been saving just in case a Frenzy build does pop up, but it's hard to see this replacing anything relevant. So that's going to conclude the video. Let me know what you guys think. Have you been using some of these uniques to your advantage? Listen, if you see one drop, you get excited, you're probably going to throw it on. I did this while leveling up. Any unique I saw when I was first leveling with the campaign hype, I threw it straight on. Even in World Tier 6, even if I knew it wasn't that good, I was like, I'm going to use this because it dropped and it looks cool and I want people to see what I'm using. So that's going to be the breakdown of this video. Let me know what you used for a long time. Maybe I missed something. Maybe you know about some interactions that I haven't seen. Let me know in the comments for sure. As always, if you enjoyed this content, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss my next video, and I'll see you all in the next upload.